This is Ed Robinson of Kensington College. Continuing our lessons on VBA, we'll now discuss VBA Date and Time. We can consider the date system that we have in Excel and VBA in that we consider the number of days, in this case 42,873 days since the start of the previous century, that is to say from the start of 1900, 1st of January, sort of. And then we consider the half a date after that, 0.5 of the day, and that will correspond to midday. So let's just see if that's true. If I format the cells, and I'll do a custom date to make sure that I include the time as well, and for example this one here, and you can see that that gives us midday on that many days from 1900, which happens to be the 18th of May. I'll discuss when the actual date system starts. There is a bit of a problem because of a leap year, so things are not quite correct. But for example, 1900 was not a leap year, and a lot of people thought it was, and I'll explain why it's not. But for the moment, I'm just going to see roughly how the date system works. If we just take a series of numbers, and then I'll just duplicate those numbers, and then I'll format these ones as date and time, just as an ordinary date rather, which is fine. So that, but the problem is we don't have a day 0, so we better just make that. And if you think about the way that things, time is arranged, for example, our lives start at 0 and then we become 1 year old, and meanwhile we're called 6 months old and so on. So there is a date 0 that we must consider as well. So that has to be the day before, which is the 1899. I forgot to mention that we could actually bypass all this explanation, and just because it's not really important for doing for using the VBA functions. But if you're interested, just follow along. Otherwise, you could just fast forward this section. But let's take a look down here because there's a mistake. Now, we're not gone quite far enough. I want to go to this date here. Now, that date there, unfortunately, did not exist because 1900 was not a leap year. I'll quickly tell you why 1900 is not a leap year. The current idea of a leap year is that if we, every 4 years, so that all of these are leap years, and indeed they are. Even up to 1800 is a leap year. So this is based upon the idea that we've got 365 days in the year, but indeed we don't have that. We have more like 365.25 days, and that means that the Pope Gregory in 1582 decreed that these were not to be leap years because of the rotation of the Earth being 365.25 days. Which of course is 365.25 days. But indeed the actual rotation is more like this. It depends on how you measure it, but it's more of that. So what we had to do, he had to do, Pope Gregory, was to decree that certain of these were not leap years. For every 400 years was indeed to be a leap year. But you'll notice that 1900 is still got left out. So in summary, every 4 years is a leap year, but every 100 years is not, but every 400 is. It matters not at the end of the day, this here 1900 is not a leap year. And that means, therefore, that this particular date in red down here did not exist. This date system, by the way, seemed to have originated certainly in the days of Lotus 123 and perhaps VBACh, I don't know. But Microsoft seemed to have followed the made the same error, basically. So what did they do about it? They moved the goalposts. So what they did was basically take all of these dates down to that bogus day and simply drag them down by one and make that 29th basically disappear. But then what they needed to do, therefore, was to define the start date of the 30th of the 12th. So that's what you will hear as the definition of the start date. Microsoft's date system starts on the 30th of the 12th, 1899. You think that's an unusual date? Well, that's the reason why. Primarily because of that bogus leap day. What that means, though, is that these dates will actually be wrong. So if I format that as a date, then it gives you the wrong date. But if you format one of these as a date, they're correct. But it doesn't matter that much, because what we're usually interested in is the difference between two dates, the number of days in between them. So as long as you don't straddle those two, that date, then things are okay. So generally speaking, you don't really need to worry about it, as a matter of fact, and it's been fixed up in various ways. So let's consider the VBA date and time functions. We'll take a look at now, date and time. Let's try now in our command button. It gives us the date and the time of that particular, so it gives you the day and then the month. In the case of American date, you might it will appear with the day first, but with the month first. But if you wish to change that, you could go to the control panel and then go to clock language and try. This is in Windows 7, of course, and then it's region and language, so you could change the format of the date in there if you wanted to. You could actually leave out the parentheses as it happens using that function, just use the now, and that still works. Then just to emphasize, as what I was talking about before, that the date and time is a number, it's a double, and so I could actually convert that to a double. And you find that it gives the number of days since 1900, followed by the decimal, which is the fraction of the current of that particular day, giving the time, of course. If we try using the format function, then you'll see that should format it November, for example, in this case, of that particular date, or we could leave out one of those M's and try that, and that just gives you an abbreviated form. If you want to get some help on the format function, the best way is to double click really on that word to highlight it, and then take a look at all the format functions, the date functions, which are very, very helpful indeed. This is the one we were just talking about, the days and the months and the abbreviated form and so on. We just considered the date function. It just gives what it says, the date whereas the time on its own will just give the time.